Len, why is there a strange car in our driveway? I asked innocently enough, peeking through the living room curtains. An eerie silence fell over the room. Len didn't respond, his face frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Well, I pressed, my heartbeat quickening. Who does that blue Honda belong to? Len cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his recliner. Must belong to one of the neighbors. You know how people park wherever around here. I furrowed my brow, not buying his excuse for a second, but it's pulled up right against the garage door, and I could have sworn I heard voices coming from the shed. Pushing himself up with a grunt, Len waved his hand dismissively. You're hearing things, dear. I'm going to run some errands. We're out of milk and... Marching towards the back door, I cut him off. Not so fast, mister. We're getting to the bottom of this right now. I flung open the door and stepped outside, the hot summer sun beating down. Len reluctantly followed behind as I made a beeline for the shed, steeling myself for what I might find. With a trembling hand, I pulled open the shed door. The sight before me sucked the wind right from my lungs. There she was, a young, attractive woman, frantically pulling her dress back on as she sat on an overturned bucket, her makeup smeared and hair disheveled. A visceral cry escaped my lips as the reality smashed into me like a freight train. My husband of 22 years, the man I thought I knew inside and out, was having an affair. Marla, I can explain, Len sputtered, rushing over with panic in his eyes. I recoiled from his touch, feeling as though I didn't recognize this man anymore. Save your lies. How long has this been going on? Who is she? The woman hurriedly gathered her belongings, the tears flowing freely now. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault, she babbled as she rushed out of the shed, heading straight for her car. Hey, we're not done here, I shouted after her retreating figure. But it was no use. She peeled out of the driveway in a cloud of dust and squealing tires, leaving me alone with the man I once trusted above all else. Len slumped against the shed and slowly sank to the ground, burying his face in his hands. Please, let me try to make this right. Kara meant nothing. It was just a stupid fling. A fling? I spat, feeling the bile rise in the back of my throat. We're supposed to be partners, for better or worse. But you've made a mockery of the most sacred vow two people can make. How could you do this to me? To us? Len opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. I couldn't stand to hear any more lies and half-truths at that moment. With tears stinging my eyes, I turned and headed back towards the house, feeling like I didn't recognize this man or my life at all anymore. My world had fallen apart in an instant, and the reality, as ugly and painful as it was, finally came into focus. The sparkling veil of my marriage had been violently ripped away. The life I thought I had was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. I spent that night lying awake, my mind spinning with a million thoughts as the devastating scene replayed over and over. How could Len, the supposed love of my life, do something so despicable? So cruel? As the sun peeked through the curtains the next morning, I turned to look at the empty space on the other side of the bed. Len hadn't come home after storming out of the house the previous day. Truthfully, I wasn't sure I even wanted him back. My head throbbing, I forced myself up and padded into the kitchen, hoping a strong cup of coffee might snap me out of this waking nightmare. The house felt eerily quiet without Len's usual whistling and humming as he got ready for work. I don't know why I allowed myself to be blindsided like this. Looking back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. Len's little work dinners that kept getting later and later. The excessive spending and shopping trips he tried to hide. Those work conferences in different cities every few months where he traveled alone. I felt like such a fool for buying into the facade, for believing the lies and half-truths he so expertly fed me for who knows how long. Len Thomas, respected insurance agent, doting father, all-around family man. What a joke that turned out to be. As I took my first tentative sip of coffee, the front door burst open. Speak of the devil. Morning, honey, Len hollered in an overly chipper tone as he strolled inside, not a care in the world. There he plopped a paper bag from the bakery on the counter and leaned in to give me a peck on the cheek. Recoiling, I nearly spilled my coffee all over him. Get away from me, you lying snake. Did you really think everything would just blow over after yesterday? Len took a step back, hands raised in mock surrender. Hey, I said I was sorry. What happened with Kara was a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I slammed my mug down, sloshing the steaming liquid over the rim. Didn't mean anything? You were carrying on an affair behind my back, Len. Not to mention blowing through our life savings on God knows what else with your constant business trips. He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering for just a moment before the callous mask slipped back into place. Look, I earned that money, so I can spend it however I damn well please. Unbelievable. My blood boiled over as the sheer depth of his narcissism and entitlement hit me. In that moment, it finally became clear this man only cared about himself. He had no concept of respect, loyalty, or commitment. Get out, I growled, fighting back hot tears of anger and humiliation. I couldn't stand to look at him a second longer. Take your syrupy apologies and go straight to hell. Len opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, he snatched up his bakery bag and stormed back towards the front door. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, you ungrateful bitch, he shouted over his shoulder on the way out. As the door slammed behind him, the dam finally broke. I slumped against the kitchen counter, sobbing as reality came crashing down in waves. Not only was my marriage over after more than 2 decades, but the man I loved never truly existed. It was all an intricately woven web of lies. In the days and weeks after Len's explosive exit, I found myself slowly unraveling the tangled web of lies he had craftily spun over the years. What began as an isolated incident of infidelity quickly revealed itself to be just the tip of a much larger, more disturbing iceberg. First, there were the money issues. I pored over our bank statements and credit card bills, feeling my anger flare with each new piece of damning evidence. Months of unexplained cash withdrawals and charges at high-end hotels in cities I'd never stepped foot in. Thousands of dollars funneled into an offshore account I never knew existed. Len had been systematically draining our life savings to fund his indulgent double life on the side, all while spinning me fairy tales about the money going towards investments and financial planning for our future. My future certainly didn't include becoming a depressed, penniless divorcee at 45. But as appalling as the fiscal betrayal was, it paled in comparison to what I uncovered next. Proof that Kara from the shed incident was just the beginning of Len's womanizing ways. Stuffed away in his closet, buried under a pile of tacky tourist t-shirts, was a veritable Pandora's box of sordid evidence. Love letters and raunchy photos from at least 3 other mistresses I could identify by name. Crudely scribbled phone numbers and salacious details on scraps of paper. Transcripts of messaging apps brimming with explicit exchanges. It made me physically ill to think of how long this repugnant double life had been going on behind my back. The worst part? Mixed among the unsettling artifacts were photos of our son Evan at various ages, baseball games, prom night, his high school graduation. It was as though Len was using memories of his own child to try and paper over the cracks of his infidelity and lies. As enraged as I felt, there was also a sickening undercurrent of pity for Evan. My innocent little boy, who idolized his father, had been so calculatingly manipulated by his own flesh and blood. I steeled my resolve knowing I had to make things right, no matter how difficult or messy it would get. The floodgates of fury truly opened when I discovered Len had been sleeping with one of his co-workers at the insurance agency, Beth Kingsley. Thanks to a fortuitous Vegas trip with the work wives a few years back, I knew Beth all too well as the bubbly, sweet-seeming mom of 3 who fawned all over Len at every office party. Now, I had transcripts explicitly detailing their torrid sexcapades, hotel room trysts, flirty messages, and lurid recaps of their insatiable lust and passion for each other. Worst of all, there was clear evidence Beth had gotten pregnant with Len's child and terminated it in secret to avoid scrutiny and complications. That was the final straw. I had to take action, not just for myself, but for all the other spurned souls damaged by Len's detestable actions. He needed to face true consequences for his reprehensible behavior, not just get shuffled off to his next willing victim. I was through being the naive, demure little wife who turned a blind eye to preserve the fantasy of marital bliss. It was time for Len Thomas to reap what he'd sown. The facade of the perfect family man came crashing down, and I would make sure the whole world saw him for the insidious fraud and cheater he really was. With the full, sickening scope of Len's betrayal now laid bare before me, I felt more alone than ever before. Who could I even trust after being so completely deceived by the person I loved most? I thought about reaching out to my own family for support, but quickly dismissed the idea. My parents were traditional types, the sort who would sooner bury the ugly truth than face it head-on. They'd just tell me to keep quiet, go to counseling, and plaster on a happy face like a good wife. No thank you. As for Len's relatives, I could already hear the dismissive squawks of his overbearing mother, insisting her precious Lenny Bear could do no wrong and that I simply didn't understand the stresses he was under. I didn't need that kind of warped enabling and victim-blaming. So I turned to the only person I knew I could trust implicitly, an old college friend named Claire. Though we'd drifted apart over the years, raising families of our own, Claire and I could always shoot straight with each other. She'd been my maid of honor and staunchest supporter when I got married. Now it was my turn to lean on her strength. "Oh my God, Marla," she gasped after I poured out the whole sordid tale over coffee one rainy afternoon. Tears of outrage pooled in her eyes as she squeezed my hand. "How could that scumbag do something like this? You don't deserve any of this." I gave her a weary shrug, the weight of it all crashing down yet again. "I really don't know, Claire. I'm just so embarrassed and feel like such an idiot." "No," she cut me off firmly. "Do not blame yourself for that bastard's sins. The only one at fault is Len and his rampant disrespect. I'll bet anything he's done this to other poor souls, too." My eyes went wide as the light bulb flickered on. Of course, Len's insatiable appetite for new conquests surely meant I wasn't the only one suffering his deceitful ways. If I could just find others in my position, maybe we could take him down once and for all. Without saying another word, I pulled out my laptop and started furiously typing out messages to ex-classmates, neighbors, fellow military wives, anyone who might potentially cross paths with the charming, yet soulless creep known as Leonard Thomas. Before long, the responses started trickling in. Stories of being cruelly misled, belittled, or pumped for money under the guise of business investments. Some brave women even laid bare their most intimate violations at Len's calloused hands. It made me sick, but also strengthened my resolve for justice tenfold. "You see what a cesspool we've stumbled onto?" I murmured grimly at Claire as we read each new confession. "That sick, twisted man has left a wake of broken lives in his path." Claire pursed her lips, eyes narrowed with fierce determination. "No more. We're going to stop this once and for all." Within days, the trickle had become a flood of outrage and anguish from women near and far, all united by the same experience of being cruelly manipulated by Len Thomas. We formed a network, sharing evidence and stories, building an unshakable case that would ultimately prove Len's guilt beyond any doubt. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel so alone and powerless in the face of such devastating betrayal. As I looked around our ragtag band of survivors, I saw the flickers of hope and resilience igniting within each woman's eyes. We weren't just victims anymore. We were the agents of Len's ultimate reckoning and undoing. And we would have our furious revenge. Our motley crew of wronged women gathered in Claire's basement one chilly autumn evening, the fire crackling as we nursed glasses of red wine and plotted our next moves. "We've got the evidence," Claire stated, her voice steely with determination. "Bank statements, phone records, testimonies, the whole 9 yards of sickening proof against Len and his escapades." Murmurs of assent rippled through the group. A few women shifted uncomfortably on the well-worn couches, haunted looks clouding their eyes. We'd all shared our shocking tales over the past weeks, each seeming more depraved than the last. But how can we make sure he actually faces real consequences this time? Tara, one of the younger members, spoke up hesitantly. She twisted a friendship bracelet around her wrist, a nervous tic I'd noticed whenever she recounted Len's salacious sexual coercion. What's to stop him from just moving on to the next town and starting over like none of this ever happened? A heavy silence fell over the room as we all considered the harsh truth of her words. Len was an expert linguist, fluent in lies, manipulation, and deceit. He could easily slither his way out of any corner we boxed him into, unless we went for the jugular. "We hit him where it hurts most," I said, gripping the arms of my chair. His money, his career, his precious reputation in this community he's toyed with for decades. Nods and murmurs of approval met my suggestion. I could see the fire sparking behind each woman's eyes, burning away the cobwebs of doubt and insecurity that had kept us entangled in Len's web for far too long. We take all our evidence, every incriminating letter, photo, and illicit recording of his misdeeds, and we plaster it on the front pages. We shove it in the faces of his bosses at the insurance firm, his co-workers, our friends and neighbors. We make sure no one in this town can turn a blind eye to the abhorrent reality of who Len Thomas truly is. Smiles grew wider as I spoke, building up momentum. We were no longer powerless, no longer forced to suffer in silent shame while he carried on unchecked. For too long, Len had controlled the narrative, painting himself as the well-intentioned family man while lying straight to our faces. Now it was our turn to dictate the story and expose him for the immoral, self-serving scumbag that he was. We hit up every community gathering, every church social, every public event with our proof, Claire declared, rising to her feet. Let him try and hide or deflect when we bear it all for the world to see. A chorus of cheers and clinking glasses filled the air as the pieces fell into place. We spent the next few hours strategizing and preparing the final steps, channeling our fury and disgust into cold, calculated determination. By the time the last log was consumed by the sputtering fireplace, we had our battle plan traced out to the letter. The stage was set for the ultimate takedown. There would be no more second chances, no more benefit of the doubt for Len Thomas. He'd created this grotesque reality through deeds, lies, and callous disregard for anyone's well-being but his own. And now he would be forced to reckon with the full consequences in front of everyone. I caught my own reflection in the darkened window pane and did a double take. The woman staring back at me was gripped with a ferocious hunger for justice and payback that was both exhilarating and chilling. Len had awoken a merciless force within me, one I never could have imagined existed under the surface. By the time we were through with him, he would know what it felt like to have his life ripped apart by deceit and betrayal. There would be no escape, no reset button to salve his constantly growing trail of destruction. He'd made his choices, and now the world would see them laid bare for what they truly were. The annual Oakwood Community Fundraiser was always a big to-do in our little suburb. A full day of food trucks, games, music, and mingling, all in the name of supporting local schools and charities. A week ago, I would have been front and center helping to organize it all as I did every year. But today, my sole focus was ensuring Len's reckoning played out on the biggest stage possible in front of everyone he'd spent decades deceiving. "Are you ladies ready?" Claire asked in a low voice as we clustered behind the main pavilion, sending a final flurry of messages on our phones. "This is our one shot to pull this off." I took a deep, steadying breath, looking around at the determined faces surrounding me. Pamela, a lawyer's wife who loaned us the projector we'd be using. Kendall, who printed out hundreds of flyers outlining the ugly particulars of Len's transgressions. Jessica, whose tech expertise would ensure our video evidence played without a hitch. We were a united front, an army of the wronged who had been pushed too far, trampled on by one man's bottomless pit of narcissism and infidelity. Today the debt would finally be paid. "Let's do this," I said with a grim nod. Our plan was simple, yet brutal. First, we would circulate through the crowd and hand out flyers detailing the tip of the iceberg. Len's affairs, lies about his work obligations, the mistress he was canoodling with in our very own backyard. Let the gossip and whispers reach a fevered pitch. Then, once enough eyes were focused on the main stage, we'd hijack the AV setup under the guise of an important community safety message and unload the full bombshell. Videos, emails, chat logs, phone records, hard evidence of Len's depraved manipulation, gaslighting, and financial treachery spanning years. The receipts, as the kids call them. Finally, once the proverbial bomb had been detonated, Pamela would take the stage and invite every last one of Len's victims to bravely share their unvarnished stories. No more secrets. No more carefully curated veneers. This was about laying it all out in the harsh light of day, no matter how ugly it got. I felt my stomach churning as our group dispersed, Kendall and Jessica taking their posts handing out the flyers. Deep breaths. You can do this, Marla. Striding towards the entrance with more confidence than I actually felt, I caught sight of my target. Len perched at one of the beer gardens, his arm draped idly around a young, overly made-up woman I didn't recognize. Of course, he just couldn't help himself, even after the devastation his actions had wrought. Seething, I shoved the incriminating flyers towards him, practically snarling as I spoke through gritted teeth. You should really take a look at these, Len. He glanced down at the damning evidence splayed before him, his face quickly draining of color. What the hell is this? Your reckoning, I spat back, wheeling away before he could respond. As I stalked back towards the staging area, I could already feel the rumbles of shock and outrage rippling through the crowds. The tendrils of doubt about Len's true nature were rapidly spreading through every nook and cranny like insidious vines, and that was before the full reveal. By the time we hijacked the AV system, Pamela's stern baritone voice ringing out over the speakers, hundreds of eyes were already locked on the towering projection screens. Neighbors, co-workers, parents of our kids' friends, they all watched in stunned silence as a cavalcade of incriminating videos and evidence poured forth. Len's confidently barking orders at his mistress during a dirty video chat, right alongside timecodes proving he was on a business trip at the time. Itemized statements showing thousands siphoned into private accounts to fund his sex vacations and indulgences. A frantic string of texts from Beth, one of his co-workers, describing her fears about being pregnant, and the haunting follow-ups where she despaired over having an abortion to avoid being found out. The floodgates of truth and consequences had burst wide open, and there was no turning back now. As the soul-crushing revelations spilled out one by one, I scanned the crowd for Len, my jaw clenched when I finally spotted him. Standing alone in an open field, hands jammed into his pockets as the gathered masses' gazes bored directly into him. There would be no fast talking or smooth avoidance today. The lifetime con man had finally been cornered, and the spotlight of judgment had turned blindingly harsh. The crowd's stunned silence quickly gave way to a deafening roar of shock and outrage as the full breadth of Len's depravity played out on the massive screens. Seeing his most twisted misdeeds projected in high definition was like a bucket of ice water being hurled at our community's collective face. I locked eyes with Len, frozen in the center of that grassy field amidst a sea of accusatory glares and shouts. His smarmy facade of confidence had fully crumbled as the horrifying truth was laid bare before everyone. His mouth hung open, pale and trembling like a cornered rat. In that moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity for the pathetic, hollowed-out shell of a man before me, but it was far too little, far too late for such mercies. That's enough. Pamela's commanding voice boomed over the speakers as she strode onto the stage, her stern expression cutting through the din like a knife. Now that you've all seen the harsh reality of Len Thomas's reprehensible actions and deceptions, I invite those he's directly wronged to come forward and share their stories. The lies end today. There was a weighted pause as Pamela held the microphone out with an unwavering gaze, almost daring anyone to break the suddenly tense silence. After a few harrowing seconds, Claire was the first to make her way up onto the stage, shooting me an encouraging nod. Soon, a trickle became a steady stream of other women ascending the steps. Friends, colleagues, former lovers. Each took turn at the mic, voice shaking yet resolute, as they finally unburdened the trauma and pain Len had inflicted. The theme, as it went on, was clear. Len was a chronic predator who stopped at nothing to feed his endless need for ego and sexual gratification. Tales of infidelity, gaslighting, blocked messages, and ominous threats spilled forth one by one. Financial schemes, hushed-up abortions, blatant lies straight to the faces of loved ones. As the stories piled atop one another like grisly Tetris pieces, there was no denying the overwhelming evidence of Len's unfathomable betrayals. As if the footage wasn't damning enough, Pamela stated at one point, glaring out at Len, who still stood unmoving, hands jammed into his pockets. I think we can all agree that Mr. Thomas has clearly been living a profoundly sick double life at everyone else's expense. Another chorus of howls and furious jeers erupted across the gathered onlookers. I watched with a strange sense of detachment as Len squirmed under their escalating judgment, like the worm who'd finally turned. There would be no smooth-talking way out of this deep, inescapable pit he'd willingly dug for himself over decades of duplicity. "Give it up already, you piece of trash! Get out of our town! Lock his slimy ass up for good!" The epithets and cries for vengeance rained down as people steadily fled the area, utterly repulsed and disgusted by the horrors they'd just seen. Word would spread like wildfire, infecting all corners of our insular little community. Len's smug, congenial mask had been shed, and his true self as a conscienceless manipulator left bare for all to gawk at in stunned revulsion. Even his own employer and co-workers couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. Not after the shocking betrayals and damning evidence we'd painstakingly compiled. By night's end, his office keys, laptop, and credentials were retrieved, and he was barred permanently from setting foot on the insurance agency property. As for his financial deceptions and siphoning our money into private slush funds, it didn't take long for the lawyers, and eventually law enforcement, to swarm in and start connecting those nefarious dots. Everything he'd worked so hard to conceal was now inextricably out in the open, free for due process to take its long overdue course. Within a matter of days, Len found himself being served with divorce papers from my attorney, slapped with lawsuits, charges of fraud, and more from no less than 6 different wronged parties. Just that quickly, his plush yuppie lifestyle was imploding from every conceivable angle, the full weight of his sins coming crashing down upon him. As I watched the karmic tornado steadily consume him from afar, I almost felt nothing. No sense of victory or relief, just emptiness and the creeping realization that the man I'd loved for decades never truly existed at all. Len was gone. Or perhaps he never really was there to begin with. The grand illusion had finally dissipated completely, leaving only the harsh truth as exposed and ugly as it was. But at last there was justice, merciless and inescapable, just as it should be. In the weeks and months following Len's cataclysmic downfall, I found myself adrift, grappling with waves of anger, sadness, relief, and emptiness, all washing over me. 45 years old, newly divorced, with hardly a nest egg to my name, thanks to his financial treachery. How does someone even begin to rebuild their life from such smoldering wreckage? I thought about moving away, putting the devastation of our hometown in the rearview forever. But fleeing wouldn't solve anything. As my new friends helped me realize, true healing could only begin once I confronted the innermost demons and fears that Len had exploited all those years. It started small, reaching out to a therapist who specialized in recovering from narcissistic abuse, leaning on Claire and the other women whose solidarity and friendship had become a lifeline throughout my darkest hours. Reclaiming little indulgences for myself that Len had always criticized or outright denied, like getting my hair done or taking a weekend hiking trip with no schedule or demands. Slowly, achingly, the stranglehold of misery and self-doubt began to loosen ever so slightly. I found moments of levity and self-rediscovery peeking through the fog of anguish and anxiety, a journey of reclaiming my sense of self one tiny step at a time. But nothing prepared me for the heart-rending task of explaining Len's unforgivable betrayal to our son, Evan. The boy, now a grown man of 21 studying at State, had always idolized his father, despite his frequent absences and emotional distance. My heart broke into pieces watching the light of hero worship flicker and die behind his eyes, his shoulders sagging from the weight of 1,000 disillusioning realizations. We spoke in hushed tones over coffee and Danish at that little cafe by his campus apartment as I relayed grim details as gently as I could. His father's serial infidelities and sexual improprieties, callous financial deceptions, the sheer staggering depth of his double life. Evan's face remained impassive and still as a statue as I went on, each seismic revelation sending another fracture through that youthful innocence and optimism I'd always envied so much. "Don't know what to say, Mom," he managed weakly once I'd laid it all bare. His reddened eyes brimmed with tears of confusion, anger, and hurt unlike anything I'd ever seen. To even think my own father could do something so sick and cruel. Reaching across the table, I gave his hand a firm squeeze, believing in my bones that stark, unvarnished honesty was the only way forward from such a catastrophe. "I know, sweetie, and I'm so sorry you've been put through this nightmare, too. Your dad, he was a fundamentally broken person, ruled by his own selfishness. You're one of his victims just as much as me or anyone else." My heart clenched as Evan's lower lip began to tremble, his stoic facade crumbling as hot tears cut tracks down his cheeks. I quickly pulled him into a fierce embrace, cradling his tall frame as sobs racked his body. Not the strong, confident young man laughing at dumb memes just weeks earlier, but a wounded child grappling with the cruel reality that the man he looked up to most was a hollow fraud who valued nobody's life but his own. As I gently rocked him, rubbing soothing circles on his back, I doubled down on my vow from that first fateful day to fiercely protect my son from the caustic emotional poison Len had injected into our family unit. If it took years of dedicated therapy or professional guidance to undo that insidious damage, so be it. No more half-truths or papering over the ugliness to preserve messed-up notions of keeping a happy facade. Evan and I would confront and process every ounce of Len's depravity and betrayal head-on, no matter how painful, until we regained the unshakable bond of trust and support he'd so callously violated with his deceptions. As the now familiar pangs of fury mixed with heartbreak flowed through me again, I gently extricated myself and looked my son squarely in the eyes, cupping his face in my hands. "I promise you, Evan, we're going to get through this together and come out stronger on the other side. That man's evil will not define who we are or how we move forward from here." His brow knit with resolution. He gave a slow but emphatic nod. "You're right, Mom. We'll heal. Just don't ever shut me out again, okay? I need you now more than ever." I pulled him into another fierce hug, feeling more reinvigorated and purposeful than I had in forever, as the first crucial steps of our new beginning started to come into focus, a path by uncompromising truth, no matter how ugly or painful, fully peeling away Len's insidious mask and banishing its withering stain once and for all. A righteous cleansing, not just vengeance for vengeance's sake, but purposeful self-preservation and reclamation of our autonomy. With Evan by my side, I knew our journey would be long and arduous, but no longer would we compromise what was right in the face of such sickening depravities. We were drawing our own map forward this time, scars, emotional wreckage, and all. Our destination was healing, even if the roads were still hidden from view. But one thing was now etched in stone. There would be no more lies, no more shying away from ugly truths. The slate had been wiped brutally clean, and it was time to rebuild something brand new, out of the ashes.